Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a great lunch, made lots of new friends. I hope at tea time you will speak not just to your new friends in the audience here, but also to the exhibitors who've really got a lot of innovative products. I want to remind you about the hashtag for the conference, if you haven't tweeted yet about something you've learned today, and the app with the poll question about changes in the last 10 years. And also to say that after our next plenary session, I think you go straight into your next workshops, and then tea, and then back to whichever workshop you were in for the open forum, and then back here at 10 to 4. So I won't see you again till 10 to 4, but I'm now delighted to introduce Richard Gerver. I'm really looking forward to this. Richard, I said, how shall I introduce you? He said, well, just say ex-head teacher and a big mouth. And that's the description his wife gives. So there is much more to Richard than that, and we're about to hear, I think, a funny, inspirational lecture about change and human potential. So welcome, Richard. Thank you.
Two words that send fear into any speaker after lunch. Inspirational is one of them, because what you find, particularly for a group of busy people who I guess very rarely get the chance to eat a proper lunch, that you're now all sat there ready for a proper sleep, and you're thinking, we've been bombarded this morning, so frankly, if you can inspire us now, good luck to you, pal. It's honestly a privilege and an honour to be here. I've in various ways tried to help the hospice movement, I suppose through fundraising more than anything, for at least the last 6 years. It became very important to me actually when I was a head teacher, and you know, tragedy strikes in all kinds of ways, and in a 2-year span we lost 2 of our children, but the incredible support that the hospice movement gave those children and their families was truly extraordinary. And it was a touch of luck really that 6 years ago I was invited to be involved in helping to raise funds. And I have to tell you, between you and me, that I'd much rather be here giving of my time to you today than what I was doing 6 years ago. Because 6 years ago this weekend, I ran the London Marathon to help the hospital. I know, look at me. You can tell I haven't run since, can't you? It was a scarring moment. It's funny actually, because some of you have been around the movement some time, may even recognise my face. This is a little known fact, but thanks to a photograph taken of me at the 2009 marathon, I was the face of recruiting runners. I know, it's unbelievable. I was the face. It's why no one ran for Hospices in 2010. I was the face because a photographer, one of the official photographers, took a picture of me, like in my vest. It was a great picture, like this. Now, what people don't know about that picture that then appeared on the fundraising poster was that was taken at the start line. Genuinely. And I don't know if any of you have run the London Marathon, but frankly, it can take you, you have to put down where you think you should start based on your natural ability. And I decided to start with the 15-foot tall nurses and Shrek donkey right at the back. And what they don't tell you is it can take you half an hour to get to the start line. So I was just so bloody bleak. I was knackered by the time I got to the start line. Just bloody bleak. And the reason I tell you that is because I want to show you the picture of me as I came towards the end of the London Marathon. There you go. That's me as I'm coming to the end. And actually, I think, to be honest, I'd walked for the last 4 miles. And as I turned the corner, and you can see Buckingham Palace in the background, somebody shouted me, well, at least bloody run the last bit. So there you go. The good news, just so you know, is as a result of that, and I know it's incredible to believe, as a result of that particularly important day in my life, apparently I'm now on a list of ultra extreme athletes. And that happens to anyone. apparently, who's done any sporting activity for more than 5 hours. So I won't go into detail about how long it took me to run. Suffice to say, walking 26 miles means that you become an ultra-endurance athlete. So just marvel, if nothing else this afternoon, be inspired and marvel at my sheer physical presence as I stand in front of you today. Let me tell you a little bit about, I was asked when I said I'd come and do this about two things. They said, one, could you talk a little bit about your connection to the hospice movement? And secondly, could you say something, because we're celebrating 10 years, could you say something about where you were 10 years ago? So the answer is yes, I can. I was here 10 years ago. I was, as Ros said, a primary school head teacher in a place called Long Eaton, on the borders of Nottingham and Derby. It's an interesting place, interesting community. And I was running this school. Now, I'm not going to tell you the story of this school today, but I am just going to set up a bit of background for you, because obviously I don't carry your expertise. I don't work in retail, I never have. But I have run what I believe is a similar organisation to the things that challenge you. So I took on a primary school, which we had a reputation when I took over. It was apparently one of the worst 10 performing primary schools in the United Kingdom. I didn't know that, by the way, when I applied for the job. Hence the fact that I was never a genius. I wasn't one of these young prodigy heads. The only reason I got the job was because I was the only applicant for the job. Genuinely, I promise you that's true. In fact, I think I went into, if I remember rightly, to fix the photocopier, and that was it. They just grabbed me, you're breathing, you're in charge. But it was very interesting to take over an organisation like that, because you can imagine there wasn't a lot of positive feel around the place. I mean, genuinely, it was on the then government's list of schools that were on what it was called the Phoenix list, I think. And what that meant was that schools that couldn't be shifted would be shut down, everybody would be sacked, they'd reappoint a new governing board, they'd appoint an entirely new staff, and apparently mystically, by having a new uniform and a new name, that would transform the fortunes of the school. Luckily, it never happened to us. And suffice it to say that I was working with a remarkable team. And within 18 months, that remarkable team had led to such a transformation that they'd won the UNESCO World Education Award. Now, the reason a lot of what I hear about your challenges resonate for me are manifold, actually. But the one in particular I think we should talk about today, and I'm sure you already have, because I think get-togethers like this, frankly, are therapy. Don't you? This is the opportunity for you, basically, and excuse my language, just to bitch about the people that drive you bonkers when you don't. This is like once a year, you know, you can just have a go. And this is and let me mention one word to you. Okay, now I know, and I don't want to be contentious about this, because I know they give of themselves, and without them we couldn't do what we do. But one word for you, okay? Volunteers. It's a bit like swearing, isn't it? And today is the day that I want you all, before you leave here, get it off your chest. Okay, talk about at least one. Now, the thing about state primary schools is they're filled with volunteers too, right? We've got them all over the place. I had at least 50 who were vital to me because they came in to plug the gaps in staffing that we had, often because of funding. They'd come and hear readers, they'd work in a whole range of situations. I don't know how many of you are a school governor. I'm a school governor, so I'm allowed to say this. They're the worst bloody volunteers in any school. They drove me completely bonkers. But I want to tell you about one particular, because this is the stuff nobody prepares you for when you move into a world populated by volunteers. Now, I can't explain it, because we love them really, don't we? But they cause more problems than anybody else in any organisation we've ever worked in, right? And they throw you curveballs. Day one of my job as a head teacher in a failing school. I'd been given 2 years by the government to rescue this place, or everybody was out of work, right? This was a big gig. Day one, I'm terrified, genuinely. I was one of those people that applied for headship because of my ego. I did not have the experience, right? I walked in there, and it was one of those things, you know, whenever you get a promotion in any field of life, your first reaction is, yes! And you stand there in the mirror and you go, me the man. And then what happens is the actual reality of the pressure on you clicks in, and the next reaction is one I shan't repeat, but you end up in the loo. Right now, I'm there on day one, and this is now in my head. I have seen the size of the problem. It was quite a big primary school. We had 550 kids, so it was quite large. And I'm there on day one, like a cat in the headlights. I screw it up, right? And I'm sat there in my office, rearranging things, trying to look important and knowledgeable. Because it's funny, isn't it? When you run something, one of the things that's always amazed me is people think the greatest gift they can bring you are their problems. You know, and it's like they think it's because it's like, there you are, there is the problem, this is what you're paid for. And then they leave, don't they? And they're happy. Happy Christmas, there's the gift I'm giving you. And anyway, I'm there in my office, panicking, terrified, 10 to 9 in the morning, thinking this is just the vastness of what was happening. It was waking up to me now. And there's a knock at the door. And it's Mary. Now, Mary is 80 years old. And Mary comes into my office. She's a school governor. The interesting thing about Mary is that she's been attached to that school since she was 11. She's never actually left, I'm sure of it. Apparently she was one of the first pupils that had ever been in this school, and she was still there at 80, Mary. No one knew where she lived, apart from it must have been under the stairs, I think. Anyway, she walked into my office, she sat down. Now then, Richard, how are we? And the thing, I hadn't met Mary before. She'd been on my interview panel. Right, bless her, Mary. And she says, this has become a tradition for me, and it had. This is how bad the school had been. They'd had 8 head teachers in 10 years, right? So this was a well-rehearsed thing for Mary. She came in, she sat down, and I'm not sure, actually, that the others, having had a meeting with Mary, had lasted more than the day. Mary walks in. The things they don't prepare you for. She sits there, she's a lovely old woman. She really was a sweetheart. And she sat down in my office. Now then, Richard. I said, hello, Mary, how are you? She said, are you busy? And you know people do that, and they don't listen for the answer, do they? Because they don't care, frankly. I mean, yes, I am, Mary. I've got 550 new children to meet, 1,000 new parents to sort out, and 120 demotivated staff. But apart from that, I'm fine, Mary. Right? Oh, good, she says. Anyway, I'm so glad my traditional thing is to come and greet the new head. I thought it's very nice, the new head teacher on the first day. She said, because I need to inform you that you are now in my will. Bloody hell. Fantastic, Mary. That's so spot on. Get many bonuses as the head teacher, but this was looking up. She said, no. The thing is, she said, I've left instruction in my will for my ashes to be buried on the school ground. And the incumbent head teacher has to do the scattering, so I need to talk you through the plans, she said. This is day one, right? Now, I use that example because love them though we do, they drive us bonkers, don't they? And let's start with the things we have in common. Because as I've spent time outside of education, and I've been out now for 8 years, I've had the most extraordinary experiences I never dreamed that I'd have, actually. I've met extraordinary people, I've been to amazing places, and I never forget the day I walked out or left the school to start this new life. I honestly couldn't believe that I would have a future that would last more than a few months. Because I couldn't believe that anybody outside of my sector would have any idea what I was talking about. Because I believed that my sector was unique. I believed that my sector, and I'm sure some of you may have worked or come across education, it's one of those sectors that thinks it's very worthy, somehow worthier than other sectors. And so people in education tend to believe that no one else could possibly have anything to do in order to help them. And also people in education think what they're going through is unique and it's a challenge that no one else would understand. And so when I left, I had no idea that just by sharing my thoughts and my experiences and the things that I found fascinating about my professional life would be so generic to other people. So what I'd like to do with you this afternoon is just share some of my thoughts and reflections around this stuff, around change. Tell you where my fascination comes from, and hope that some of what I'm about to share with you will resonate. And if you go to sleep before I get too much further into what I'm going to say. Please take this away with you right from the start. We've got to get out more, whatever sector we're in. We've got to stop believing we're unique. We've got to stop believing that somehow, because of the position we're in, we're worthier or that no one else would possibly understand. Because the irony of my position is that I left my school after being there for nearly 8 years, believing I was quite a good head teacher. And it's only in the last 8 years I've done that, that cliche. I've realised, oh my God, I wish I could go back. Because what I've learnt in this last 8 years has changed my perception of everything. And I would be so much better at my job now if I could go back again. So here's just, in the spirit of that this afternoon, in the short time I've got with you, I'll see how far I can get, but I'm just going to see if I can share some thoughts and see how much resonates. The first thing I want to say, really, and when I started to understand this fascination, it started with the school. I was in an environment that was incredibly risk averse. And like you, I was managing a diverse range of ages and experiences of people. I had some members of my paid staff who were 21, straight out of university, filled with ideas and dynamic, and the world was ahead of them. And some of them had been teaching at the school for nearly 40 years. And the senior leadership team, 3 other people on my senior leadership team, had been at this school for over 100 years between them. And one of their perspectives on the whole thing was, this young whippersnapper head's going to come in, but it won't be here long. We're the people that are the glue. We hold this place together, and we're not mad keen on change. Because actually, this one's going to be here for a couple of months, and then he'll bugger off somewhere else, and we'll be left to pick up the mess. Also what I found with some of the really experienced staff was, I was told when I took over the job by the Director of Education in the local authority, and I hate this expression to this day, I think it's one of the things that drove me most to make the school a success. He said, you need to get rid of the dead wood if you want to move forwards. And he was talking about my team. And that's somebody who apparently is a humanist and an educator. That's a horrific thing to say about, don't you? If as a teacher, can you imagine as a parent, if you came into parents' evening to see me as a teacher one day and I said, well, frankly, your child's dead wood and we need them out of the class if my class is to move on. Right? We wouldn't get on, would we, terribly well? And somehow we'd walk out appalled, but it's somehow okay to say that about fellow human beings. And one of the interesting things that had struck me about my team, and I'm sure this is true of all walks of life, no one in my team had chosen to become a teacher to deliberately screw up kids' lives. Nobody had chosen to wake up in the morning to do their job that day because they wanted to do it. They couldn't wait to do a bad job. But a lot of them came in miserable, fed up, angry, reticent, resistant to change. And one of the things I really wanted to understand was why. And as I started that journey and started to explore that question for myself as a head teacher, what I realised was that all those people had begun to do that job for a variety of reasons, but the one thing they all had in common was they were all passionate about it on day one when they first came into education. So the first question was, where did that passion go? How did they become the people they were now? And that took me to another level, because then I thought to myself, the interesting thing, the more time I've spent around kids, and I was fortunate enough to spend around 20 years of my adult life around young children, was we're not born adverse to change, if you think about it. Kids are born with an absolute desire for every minute of every day to be different. And those of us, how many of you are parents? Can you just raise your hands? How many of you are parents? Just by the way, keep your hands in the air if you have, or maybe more accurately, have survived having teenagers. I can tell, you actually didn't need to put that in. The ones that have survived having teachers have got that smug air on their faces. The ones who have children, who are young children, will know people who have survived having teenagers. They're the ones that very helpfully say to you, it doesn't get any better. I have 2 teenagers at home, it's why I spend my life travelling. But enough, that's more therapy just for me. But here's the really interesting, young children, okay, young kids, amaze me. From the minute they're born, they're curious, they're born curious, everything, they want to know about everything. They'd risk everything if they could. I know partly that's down to naivety, but everything. And we all know as a parent, don't we, they're the most exhausting days of parenthood, because frankly, if they have to do the same thing for more than 10 minutes, they'll drive you completely bonkers. It's really interesting. There are some experts out there that will tell you that we learn somewhere Between 70 and 75% of everything we learn in our lifetime before we're 5 years old. Now, I'm not talking about stuff, I'm not talking about knowledge. You think about the complexity of what you learn to do in the first 5 years of your life. You learn to walk and talk. You learn to understand vocal intonation, facial expression, body language, the sensory world around you. And all of that happens before anyone sits you down and tells you what's important to learn. And so the first question I want to ask you is this, because this is my fault. And I often stand up in front of an audience, and I'm happy to be shot at as an educator. It's okay, you can use me. Who was the first person who taught you that you had to colour in between the lines? Because that's the moment it all changes. That's the beginning of the end of our desire and love of change and curiosity. Let me make some of you feel really guilty. How many of you remember that moment as parents? I remember it clearly, to still beat myself up about it. How many remember that moment as parents? You know when you've had a really hard day at work, and you walk through the door at home, and your little darlings are there to meet you, beaming. You know how everyone says, oh, they change your life, they change your perspective on life. Yes, they do. You never want to go home again and change your perspective on life. Go there. Right. Rubbish! Right, so you go through the front door and you're knackered. At the end of the day, I think all I want is a glass of bloody wine and just sit down with maybe the news for half an hour. That's all I want. Hello, Mummy! And you walk through there, Mummy! Look at my picture! And you know that the bit they're holding is only 1/3 of the picture, because 2/3 are on the antique dining room table that had been left to you in a will by a dear relative that was a really expensive piece of furniture, right? And look at my picture! And you go, that's lovely, darling, and here's the killer. What is it? Because that's the moment, you see. That's the moment where we stop being curious, because we start to realise that actually we're not in control anymore of change and curiosity and process and learning. It's the first time that we start to see in our lives that it's other people who are going to tell us what's of value and what's important and how it should be. And kind of from that day forward, we're pretty much trained to do what we're told. And that means that change at that point starts to go from being something that's exciting. Because if you think about your own life, the things that engross you most are the things that you choose to do. The things you choose to be involved in. The things that feel like a chore at best are always things that you feel you have to do because it's somebody else's agenda. And that starts quite young. So the really interesting thing for me is about the changed notion of the way we perceive what change is. Because one of the first things I've noticed is when you talk to people about change in a professional capacity, what they're not hearing is change. What they're hearing is, you're going to make me do something else on top of what I'm already doing. Or you are going to pull me out of my comfort zone and make me do it in a way that I don't want to do it. So the very term itself isn't necessarily about change. It's about the response that we've been conditioned to believe in. It's about empowerment. And one of the issues we have to really get our heads round is, how do we reverse this? So just take a look at this picture for me. This is one of my favourite, this is from a picture from one of my favourite books in the world. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's called Earth from the Air. It's if any of your shops get a copy of this, don't sell it, keep it. Keep it for yourselves, honestly. It's an amazing book, filled with images like this. And I think a great way to illustrate this first point. Have a look at that. Now, I haven't got time this afternoon, but if I was running a seminar, I'd be saying to my audience, can you work out what it is? Now, the really interesting thing is that when you talk to most adult audiences, they start to look for the right answer. Because what we're trained to do is to believe that logic is the currency of clever. So what we do is we start to look at that image and dissect the logic. So we think to ourselves, blue water, brown land, green could be pollution, could be algae. Hold on, I think it's sulfur, I think it's sulfurous. I think it's sulfurous because that looks like a hot spring and that looks like the residue from a larval flow. I think this is somewhere volcanic. But, and this is where the logic continues, there's a wooden walkway. Now, you're not close enough to see, but the people on the wooden walkway are wearing shorts and t-shirts. So this must be somewhere volcanic, but it's a tourist destination, so it must be reasonably safe. Now, the really clever people in the room, and by the way, I love being in this position because I can see you all. And I can see the ones of you that play in pub quiz teams. Because you've got that pub quiz team smug git look on your face now. You're sat there going, well, I think you'll find I know the answer to this question. And if you are in one of those pub quiz teams, now look around the room in a second. I'm going to tell you what the answer is. You will see them go, yes. I win pointless every night. In fact, I am pointless. So